It all started in July 2024. Compared to today, it was definitely hotter. We were in Misano Adriatico, and there, during the World Ducati Week, the huge international Ducati celebration, the Borgo Panigale company presented its new flagship super sport bike, the Panigale V4 2025, which we have already tested, or rather Corda has already tested, and you can find a very detailed test here on the red channel from Vallelunga. The renewal of Ducati Sports and Naked range continued just a few weeks ago at EICMA 2024 with the unveiling, as the cool kids would say, of the new V2 platform featuring the Streetfighter V2 and Panigale V2. So doing the math, there was only one strategic motorcycle missing, a symbol for Ducati, the Streetfighter V4, which today the Borgo Panigale company unveiled in its new iteration, closely derived from the new Panigale, and for this reason it is even faster, even more aggressive. Let's start to delve into the new Streetfighter V4 2025, which, let's say it right away, will be confirmed as per tradition in the S and standard versions. From what we can see, it clearly incorporates the innovations of the Panigale V4 2025, also in aesthetic terms, with an additional new full LED headlight that stays true to the Streetfighter V4 tradition, but brings a styling update in an even more aggressive direction. Obviously, I am not here to express subjective judgments on aesthetics, but to focus more on the technical aspects. Speaking of technique, while looking at the motorcycle as a whole, the characteristics of the biplane, which have defined its character since the unveiling of the first generation of the Streetfighter V4, remain confirmed, but they have been revised to increase downforce. Ducati speaks of more than 17 kilo of vertical load at 270 km/h and doing. A quick sum with what was declared for the previous generation brings this downforce load to a truly significant figure of 45 kilo. And staying within the realm of what can be seen, but especially what will be felt, once in the saddle of the Streetfighter V4, the ergonomic updates we saw on the Panigale V4 2025 come together with further refinements in terms of riding position. A more comfortable tank seat group with more longitudinal space to accommodate taller riders, deep recesses on the sides of the tank for better support during braking, and a generously sized indentation on the top of the tank to house the chin guard of the helmet in an aerodynamic position within the fairing. Additionally, there are specific modifications for the Streetfighter, slightly lower and more forward foot pegs, and a handlebar with a new bend that brings it 10 meters closer to the rider. This is to increase comfort in the saddle, a feature that is clearly a more important design goal for a naked bike, even if hyper-naked, compared to a sport bike, but at the same time without compromising performance, taking advantage of the fact that, like on the new generation Panigale V4, the foot pegs are 10 mm narrower. Thus, on the Streetfighter, the ground clearance remains unchanged, aiming for a riding position that should be more comfortable. Now let's move on to the heart of the new Streetfighter V4 2025, which remains the 103 semi-fin 3 V4 engine, but it has been evolved. Evolved in what way? Let's say with an even closer derivation than in the past, from the engine that equips the sport bike. In fact, just looking at the declared data, 214 HP and 119.6, 14 HP and 119 Newton meters of torque, it is immediately evident how they are closer to the peaks of the Supersport bike, which has 216 horsepower, just to clarify. This is because even on the Streetfighter engine, obviously Euro 5 compliant, new features in terms of internal components that debuted on the Panigale V4 2025 are also arriving, but above all for the first time on the Streetfighter. The variable length intake horns are maintained They have a length of 25 meters and a short configuration of 80 meters in the long position, just like on the Panigale V4 2025, helping to increase performance on one hand and maintain substance and rideability at revs for real-world use. Final note and detail, Ducati, as always, provides us with peak data for power and torque once the Akrapovic exhaust from Ducati Performance is installed, reaching a total of 226 horsepower and 126.7 Newton meters, stuff from official superbikes not too many years ago. Chapter on chassis. In this case, the innovations compared to the previous generation of the Ducati hypernaked are essentially derived from the new generation supersport bike from Borgo Panigale, although with some obvious tweaks in the transition from curb hugging with fairings and semi-handlebars to a curve eater for both road and track. Specifically, however, Ducati claims that thanks to the very stable chassis of the new Panigale, the interventions on the frame and geometries of the Streetfighter V4 have been minimal to adapt it for use on a bike without fairings and thus with a very different weight distribution. In particular, we have a revision of only the fundamental dimensions of the front end without an extension of the swing arm. Thus, the steering head angle increases by half a degree and the trail grows by 1 millimeter. Details that, however, are fundamental in defining the chassis of a motorcycle to give it balance and usability. Along with these worn finishes, there is also the substantial material that Ducati had already integrated into the Supersport model, and thus the frame remains confirmed in its name as a front frame. In its nature as a monocoque and aluminum alloys is significantly lighter, just under 3.5 kilos compared to 4.4 kilos of the previous unit. And above all, decidedly more flexible laterally, aimed at maximizing riding feel. We are talking about a 39% reduction in lateral stiffness. A similar decrease, minus 43% in lateral stiffness, has affected the swing arm, which, as is evident from the images, and has already been discussed, debated, sometimes criticized, often appreciated on social media, during the presentation of the Panigale, is no longer a single-sided swing arm, but a pragmatic, double-sided element. Pragmatic because its dual arm nature derives from one thing only, function, from the pursuit of maximum performance. Thus, with this philosophy, it has been designed with these wide lateral cutouts that make it a true modern sculpture for the Supersport model. In this way, Ducati, as per tradition, has brought it to its most performance-oriented naked bike, which closely derives from the sport model. And beyond stiffness, the swing arm is also significantly lighter than the previous one. In the declared value, Ducati sums unsprung masses of the rear wheel and swing arm, stating that they have saved as much as 2.9 kilos in this area, which is a huge amount when talking about unsprung masses, especially in the case of the wheel or rotating components. The wheels, like those of the Panigale, are new forged elements designed directly by Ducati, weighing just 2.95 kilos for the front and 4.15 kilos for the rear. Staying in the field of chassis, the Streetfighter V4 also features Öhlins Smart EC 3.0, thus the third-generation semi-active suspensions from Öhlins, which compared to the past can rely on spool valves, more precise and faster hydraulic valves in implementing setting changes, which therefore provide a better feel and a quicker adjustment to different changes in scenario. Moreover, they also allow for a greater range of adjustments, which is particularly useful on a bike like the Streetfighter V4 that promises great fun on the road, but also excellent performance on the track. Compared to the Panigale V4, there are two main differences. One concerns the leverage of the monoshock, which is more progressive for road comfort, and the other is an interesting cruise detection mode, which specifically relates to the suspension, essentially when it detects a constant speed, such as during highway or suburban transfers, it automatically softens the setup to increase comfort. A small trick that I am sure will be particularly useful for those who travel many kilometers with their Streetfighter. We conclude the substantial chapter dedicated to the chassis with the brakes. Once again, the main innovations come from the Panigale, namely the new Brembo iPure calipers in terms of hardware, which are lighter and more effective in heat dissipation, and in terms of hardware and software, the new Race ECBS, that is the ABS with combined braking developed by Ducati in collaboration with Bosch. Beyond the greater number of adjustable levels, its combined braking functionality in terms of performance is its most peculiar and interesting element. Just to understand what it can do, essentially, when entering a corner, even using only the front brake, the Race ECBS engages the rear brake to help the bike enter and take the apex even faster. A maneuver that riders, for example in MotoGP, perform with the thumb rear brake, which instead, on the Streetfighter V4, as on the Panigale, is now executed automatically by the electronics. And speaking of electronics, could the new Streetfighter V4 2025 lack the very important innovations that Ducati has integrated into the new Panigale? Absolutely not. The main one among these is the new DVO, Ducati Vehicle Observer, a system, a software, an algorithm that simulates the presence of over 70 sensors, not actually present on the bike, this to provide the control unit with additional data to work with, and ultimately to allow for even more precise, faster and refined driving aids. Specifically, the controls that utilize the interpolated and simulated data from the DWO are traction control, wheelie control, and also power launch, which is Ducati's launch control, not the slide control that still operates with different logic. See, however, we already know that Ducati's intention for the future is to extend, or rather to make readable, the data coming from the DVO to all other onboard systems. To clarify, this includes both measurements that in MotoGP, for example, are measured by linear sensors and potentiometers, such as fork travel or steering angle, as well as other data that are not even recorded in MotoGP, but are simply calculated, like the forces transmitted to the ground by the bike. Another interesting element of the electronics, also in this case, a refinement. But when it comes to bikes of this level, it is often the refinements that make the difference. The electronic gearbox is devoid of micro switches on the push rod. What does this mean? That the feel on the lever is more direct, more crisp. And how does the electronic gearbox know when you are shifting? Well, the system adjusts simply thanks to a sensor placed directly on the gearbox drum. Finally, to complete the picture of the highly sophisticated electronic package of the new Streetfighter V4, there is the new 6.9-inch color TFT instrumentation with an aspect ratio of 8:3, thus very horizontal, which we have already seen on the Panigale V4 that it stands out both for the overall clarity of how information is provided to the rider and for the ability to view this information simultaneously and in a differentiated manner depending on whether one is on the road or on the track. Just to be clear, a feature that may not have been essential on the Panigale but becomes so on the Streetfighter is the ability to have the navigator displayed on the instrumentation simultaneously with the essential data of the motorcycle or on the track, the essential telemetry data of the motorcycle's use, along with the tachometer and the values set for the various riding aids. So far, we have talked about the Streetfighter V4 in the more premium S version, which, as I described it, weighs 189 kilograms in running order without fuel. 2 kilograms more, 191, is the weight recorded by the standard version, which, as per Ducati tradition, differs essentially in the chassis components. In this case, indeed, we have a fully adjustable Showa big piston fork at the front, a monoshock absorber and a Sachs steering damper, alloy wheels instead of forged ones, and instead of a lithium battery, a regular lead battery, thus a package that is still of high level, but not refined and cutting edge like that of the S version. To conclude, when will the Streetfighter V4 arrive at Ducati dealerships? March 2025. Well, friends of Red, for this instant deep dive, at the time of the release of the new Streetfighter V4 and V4S 2025, that's really all I invite you. As always, to spark the discussion down in the comments. Were you expecting something different from the latest generation of high-performance Nuda from Borgo Panigale? Let us know. For the rest, if you liked the video, give it a nice like, and if you haven't done so yet, remember to subscribe by activating the bell. See you in the next video. Who knows, maybe riding the Streetfighter V4 with the throttle.